Hello everyone and welcome back to Simply Biology. Today we're going to be focusing on diffusion. Now, diffusion is what's known as a passive process because it does not require energy in the form of ATP. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the factors that affect the rate of diffusion. We're going to look at the differences between simple and facilitate diffusion and also compare the two processes. So without further ado, let's get started. So firstly we're going to look at the factors which affect the rate of diffusion. So the first one is the concentration gradient. So the concentration gradient is merely just the difference between the area that has a high concentration of the particles compared to the area that has a lower concentration of particles. And the difference between these two areas, it's what's known as the concentration gradient. A larger concentration gradient will increase the rate of diffusion. We also have the composition of cell membrane, and as we will focus on later in the video, the factors that affect the rate of diffusion are the composition of intrinsic channel proteins and carrier proteins which are found along the cell membrane. More proteins along the cell membrane will mean that it will be a faster rate of diffusion. You also have the size of particles. So larger particles will diffuse and move slower than smaller particles since they have less kinetic energy and move slower due to the larger mass. So therefore the smaller particles will diffuse faster than the larger particles. The surface area for diffusion. So surface area, for example, a larger surface area will increase the rate of diffusion because there's a greater area for the particles to diffuse across, either diffuse across the membrane in this case. And then finally we also have distance. Now distance is very important for diffusion because a smaller distance will increase the rate of diffusion. And one example you can see here is the rate of diffusion in the alveoli, since the capillary layers are one cell thick, and therefore it provides a very, very short diffusion distance for the oxygen and the carbon dioxide diffusing in and out of the bloodstream. So, like I just said previously, diffusion is a passive process because it does not require energy, unlike active transport. So, in the definition of diffusion is the net movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of lower concentration down a concentration gradient. So if we look here in the top left, there's a high concentration of particles, but in the bottom right there's a low concentration of particles. So diffusion will move these particles down the concentration gradient from an area of higher to an area of lower concentration, down the concentration gradient, and this will end up like this when there's no net movement of particles because they're all evenly spaced out. Now we move on to a process of what's known as facilitated diffusion. And facilitated diffusion occurs due to the presence of two proteins, where we have channel proteins and we have carrier proteins. So firstly look at channel proteins. So what these types of proteins are is they run all the way through the phospholipid bilayer of the cell membrane, and they provide a channel to allow the ions or water-soluble molecules to move across the membrane. Now, these are usually guarded and gated with an electric current, which means that when a voltage is applied, the channel will open and allow the ions or the water-soluble molecules to flow through and across the membrane. We also have what's known as carrier proteins. Now carrier proteins, when they bind to the substrate, undergoes a change, which is known as an allosteric change, since the substrate will bind to the allosteric site. This causes the molecule, as you can see in the diagram, to change shape and allow this passage of the particles into or out of the membrane. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.